Well, good afternoon. My name is Kristen Antolini. I'm very excited to be back with you. I presented a few months ago about the basics of the abuse and neglect process in West Virginia, and I'm thrilled to be asked to be back. I love to talk about child welfare. I definitely answered the right call in life for work as far as what I love to do, and I am just thrilled that so many of you are taking this late afternoon Monday to also have a discussion about child welfare. I've presented on this topic many times, and so I am would love for folks just to interrupt me with questions or comments. I see some folks in the chat that I greatly respect in the child welfare space, and I encourage them and all of you to just pop in with questions. It does not bother me in the slightest, and the more discussion, the better. So today's presentation is a little bit more nuanced than my last presentation. This is just some practical ideas for assisting our parents and caregivers working with child protective services. Just some ideas that I've seen in the field recently and some new resources, at least new to me, that I've learned about recently that even I hope some of the veterans on the call, I hope there's at least something in here that might be useful to you and new to you as well. Here's just a short agenda of what we're going to try to pack in about 25 minutes or so. We're going to talk about what maybe you can do as a provider to help a family who maybe CPS is not quite involved with yet. If they're interested in a minor guardianship proceedings, we're going to talk about some basics about helping folks navigate the child welfare process. And if you have any questions about what that court process looks like, just pop on and ask me. I'm happy to answer those. And then I'm going to highlight some new resources for domestic violence. We are seeing, at least here in Monongalia County, and I've talked to some other people in the department, we are seeing some very high numbers of domestic violence recently coming in as our referrals, and we're especially buried here in Monongalia County. I hope the other counties aren't experiencing that similar, but I've been hearing through the grapevine that that might be true. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And finally, we're going to talk about one other new resource called Family Finder. I know a lot of the people that are on the call, but just a little bit about me if we've never met before. My name is Kristen Antolini. I'm currently an assistant prosecuting attorney in Monongalia County. I only handle child abuse and neglect cases. Before that, I was a guardian ad litem and counsel for parents and caregivers in private practice in multiple counties throughout the state. I've represented hundreds of children in my career, and I did that from about 2009-ish until just last year. Um, Definitely my favorite topic to talk about is how to be a guardian ad litem. I think that representing children is the best job that anyone could ever have. The reason that I actually got into this work initially is that I have type 4 osteogenesis imperfecti, which I'm sure many of you know is a genetic brittle bone condition, although I'm the first in my family that we know about to get that condition. And as a child with OI, I knew a lot of other families that had been affected by the child welfare system, either due to their child having a fracture and it being unexplained initially at the time, or because they needed help with the system. And so I was always interested in child welfare, even from elementary school age. And my mom was actually a worker for the department. So I have a great love of this area from a young age. And just a fun fact about me, I'm in the Netflix documentary Recovery Boys, which is about a substance abuse facility over in Preston County, which I'm sure many of you have watched. If you haven't, it's a great movie. So we're first going to talk briefly about, what do you do if you're helping a family that you can kind of see going down the line that they may have some intervention with child protective services at some point? Is there anything that you can kind of do or have in the back of your mind that might be a possibility before a referral is made by someone? And what some folks will do, and I think sometimes people think like, oh, well, you have to have like the money to hire a lawyer to do this, but that's not the case. In West Virginia, we have a really, I think, smooth system for minor guardianship proceedings. And they can be heard in family court or up in circuit court. However, if you have a parent that has substance abuse disorder, it's going to get kicked up to circuit court because circuit court in West Virginia is the court that hears cases involving abuse and neglect of children. And that includes substance abuse disorders in West Virginia. So, what is a legal guardianship? It's a judicially created and legally binding relationship between a child and a caregiver, and that caregiver is transferred custody of the child, and they're also given the opportunity to make all of the decisions for the child. It is not required to have an abuse and neglect proceeding to have a minor guardianship, although you can have an abuse and neglect proceeding, and that can be the end. And it's not required that parents have to give up their parental rights to have these, and they can be terminated or modified at any time. We have some very specific rules and statutes that govern this part of the law, and they're the rules for minor guardianship proceedings, which are found on the Supreme Court website and the West Virginia Code section, chapter 44. All of the forms that you need to file an infant guardianship are actually online. So if you have a parent who you can see coming down the line that you're treating like they're not going to be able to take care of these kids, this is just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. These forms are available online for the Supreme Court website, or you can find them in any circuit clerk in any county in all 55 counties in West Virginia. If there's a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, and they want to seek a legal guardianship, but they don't want to do it by themselves and they don't have the money for a lawyer, it's always a good idea to remember that the General Litigation Clinic, and I'm plugging this because I'm also one of the instructors at the clinic, so I think it's a great program. But the General Litigation Clinic at the WVU College of Law, it is a student attorney clinic. But I think we have some pretty great lawyers. Jennifer Stevens, if any of you know her, is the clinic director, and she's full time there. And Chad Noel and I, local attorneys, assist in supervising the students. And the clinic takes referrals for folks from all 55 counties who need legal assistance. Now, they don't represent parents in abuse and neglect cases, but they certainly can represent grandparents, aunts, uncles who might be looking for a minor guardianship proceeding or something else involving children. Or if you have just folks that you're working with in general that maybe have a legal issue of a general nature that they need help with, don't forget about that General Litigation Clinic, especially this time of year. The students are really taking up a lot of referrals and taking new cases, and it's a good way to get good quality legal representation. I know many of you work in the grant space. We don't know what's going to happen with legal aid and their ability to help people. So this is just another resource. And then, of course, if you're working with grandparents who might have guardianship or have their grandchildren, always, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this program, the Healthy Grand Families program at West Virginia State University. They have local programs in every county, and I think that they do some great work. But let's say, minor guardianship just didn't work out and we find ourselves in the abuse and neglect process. I was asking some folks I work with, what do you want, medical providers, mental health providers to kind of know that are helping folks navigate the abuse and neglect process? And one of our local workers said, well, it would be really helpful for me that folks who are mandatory reporters, who are calling in those referrals to the Department for Child Protective Services to investigate, to kind of remember all of the information that we need for the referral. She was saying that so often she goes out on a referral and she just doesn't have everything that she needs. And so on your screen, and this is not my original work. This is from a desk help guide that the department published many years ago. But these are the pieces of information that are needed when you call in to make a referral. So if you're someone that finds themselves making a referral, these are just some good things to remember that are needed. The county of incident, the last name, who's in the home, their dates of birth, detailed information about the abuse and neglect, the location of the children, all of those items. Let's say you're working with a family and they find themselves in the abuse and neglect process and they have lots of questions about it. It is a very confusing court process. Earlier this year, the Supreme Court of Appeals of West Virginia produced a really well made YouTube video. The link is on your screen, and you can also just Google Supreme Court of Appeals of West Virginia navigating the process video, and it will come up. And it's a fairly short video that goes step by step of all of the steps of an abuse and neglect process. So if you're working with a patient, with a client who is just scared, this is like a good place to kind of send them to learn a little bit about what they're going to be dealing with coming up. Many of the folks on this call or might end up being a part of the case if one eventually opens. You're going to be part of that multidisciplinary team. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what are kind of the steps to reunification. How can we help parents and caregivers who are in this process of reunification? We rely extremely heavily on our MDT members. I can't really emphasize enough how often that the therapists report, the doctors report, the nurses report, the social workers report from the hospital is kind of our guiding light in these cases about what we are going to do. And what services we should provide and how we should proceed and what has happened. And we appreciate you all in those capacities more than I could ever put into words. You are critical to our system, to our MDT process. And, it's giving some thought to, if I was one of you all, if I was a therapist, if I, was working at the hospital, all of these different areas that we all joined together, what can I do to help our parents? So one way to kind of think of an overarching item is that during the reunification process of an abuse and neglect proceeding, we're always looking toward, can the conditions of abuse and or neglect be substantially corrected in the future? And we really want, as much as possible, to look at a holistic treatment narrative for our families. So to help correct that abuse or neglect in the near future, I like to ask myself, and I would ask that you all on this call who have an interest in this work and in this topic, ask yourself, what holistic efforts can I provide to the parent to help them correct the conditions of abuse or neglect? We may just look at one area like, oh, okay, well, they have substance abuse disorder, so we're gonna treat the substance abuse order, or they have an anxiety disorder, or they have a depression disorder, or they don't have sufficient housing. So it's really easy to kind of get pigeonholed in that one area. But what we see is that families are kind of suffering on several fronts. They, as you all know, they may have been abused or neglected themselves as children and they've never received treatment for that. They struggle with access to housing, access to food, access to transportation, access to just a safe environment free from domestic abuse. So if we can all look together as that whole person, so even if I'm only providing them one service or I'm only responsible for one service, what can I do in a holistic space to help them correct the conditions of abuse or neglect? So even if it's, not your thing, if you can help them with a referral for housing, a referral for food security, a referral to help with utility assistance, a referral for domestic violence, that can just go so far in our cases. Oftentimes, folks are a little bit hesitant maybe to work with their child protective services worker, to work with their prosecutor, even their attorney. And you may be that safe person that can provide some extra help in all of the areas that they need. If you're part of the MDT, please ask to join our treatment team meetings. Your input is invaluable, and we need you to help this family in a holistic way for our holistic efforts. Finally, I know some of the folks on this call will write court reports, which are greatly valued. But I would ask that if you're working with parents in our system and you're asked to do a court report or you're asked to testify, please give constructive criticism. How can this parent improve in a tangible way? What improvements have they made that can actually be measured by the court and measured by the department, measured by the child's attorney? Be very specific. Our proceedings are remedial in nature. They are not a punishment like maybe a criminal proceeding is. And sometimes think providers are a little bit hesitant to kind of say, anything that might be construed as negative. But we receive actually a fair, at least locally in Montague County, we receive a lot of lovely letters sometimes from members of the MDT that says, no, this person's doing great. We don't have any additional things that they need to do. That is a little bit difficult for us because we're trying to help people improve and substantially correct the conditions of abuse and neglect that led to the filing of the petition. So please give us tangible ways that our parents can improve and tangible ways that we can measure the improvements that they have made. There is a new resource in West Virginia. Montague County was the first launch county in April of this year. Preston County followed right after that, and it's being expanded to several more counties around the state and will eventually be statewide. It's called the Care Portal. And the basics of the Care Portal, and you might want to just do a Google search if it's new to you. The basics of the Google search is a family is involved with Child Protective Services and someone has said, hey, this mom or dad needs bed for these kids, or they need help with their utility bill, or they need Christmas presents, or Easter basket presents, or birthday presents, or whatever it is financially that they may need. That can be communicated to the Child Protective Services worker either through the MDT process or separately, and that worker can then submit a request into the care portal, and it's actually an online portal, and someone at the department, a supervisor, vets those to say, yes, I think this would be a good use of their money. Care portal then alerts their church network and their community network to these needs, and then a church or a community member will say, yes, we can take care of this. And so what we have had so far, which has just been incredible, and we're still kind of working out the kinks, but folks are $1,500 behind on rent. What are the resources for that right now, especially in these grant spaces where money's kind of drying up. These churches are stepping forward and helping us with these expenses, and they're assisting our families to try to encourage
Mhm.
reunification. And so if you haven't heard about this before, definitely give it a Google search. And it's only in a few counties now, like I said, but it will eventually be statewide. And so this is a way to help your families kind of meet some of their financial needs as they work through the reunification process.
Hey, Kristen, you had a question in the chat a few minutes
Sorry.
ago.
Yeah, let me take a look.
It said, are the basic laws and specifics that you're mentioning federal, and are things different by state?
So there is a federal framework. Thank you for that question. There is a federal framework for all child welfare proceedings throughout the United States. There are some very basic principles that every state are required to, and I'm kind of giving you the short answer here, but that are required to meet in order to receive federal funding. And without federal funding, which we generally call Title IV-E funding, without federal funding, we would have a very difficult time here in West Virginia. We'd have a very difficult time, I think, in any state funding our system. And so the general idea is that any Department of Health and Human Resources is required to make reasonable efforts prior to removing children from the home is, in fact, a federal guideline. The fact that we are to kind of assist children in making sure that they stay within their communities um, and stay and have access to kinship and people they know is a federal idea. And so all of the main overarching themes in child welfare are all come from federal laws. And then each state has taken those federal services, those federal guidelines, and made their own rules and regulations. Each state has what's called a court improvement program, and federal money flows through that court improvement program, to kind of oversee, what the court system is doing and provide services for the court system in every single state. And that money is flowed through the Children's Bureau. So it is a mix of both a federal framework that we are required to follow, and each state has their own specific rules about how that federal framework is going to be implemented. So if you have any other questions about that, let me know. That's probably like a whole other like 2 hour topic because it gets pretty complicated, but that's kind of the short version of that answer. I wanted to touch a little bit on some of the things that I'm seeing in our local practice area that are certainly kind of coming to attention that we have just a lot of concerns about. I recently had just last week, a fantastic visit to the what WVU Neuroperformance Innovation Center. So if you've ever been in Morgantown, West Virginia, right by Ruby Memorial Hospital, there's a big, beautiful building that you can see when you come into town off of I-79, and that used to be the research center for Alzheimer's and those related disorders, and they have turned that into a clinic. I was actually absolutely blown away by the fact that they are providing domestic violence survivors who have traumatic brain injuries with holistic care within this facility. And they can provide this remotely. The medical card pays for this, but they provide access to domestic violence survivors with traumatic brain injuries to a whole host of services: neurology, physical medicine, psychiatry, neuropsychology, therapies. They have a concierge medical service with it, that even includes getting a Starbucks drink and lunch when they're there. There's a med spa in it. Even if you're familiar with this, if you haven't been on a tour, I would highly encourage you to reach out to either Brandon Cool or their volunteer Susan Small. I was just completely blown away by the tour and the amazing work that they're doing there to treat our domestic violence survivors. And they have tons of space for new folks to join that program. And where referrals goes in that box right there to Brandon Cool. Another thing, if you are here in West Virginia, and I think that this has kind of been a nationwide movement, there used to kind of be an idea with domestic violence that if you were the victim of domestic violence, you had to reach out to whoever the local domestic violence center was, in order to be able to access and receive services, that they couldn't contact you directly. And that shift is changing. And so here locally, we now have a form that we can make a referral, and that the victim has to sign it. Um, the victim has to sign it. Uh, but that allows our local rape and domestic violence center to reach out to the victim to offer them services. And that is a movement that is going on statewide. So if you're in an area and you work with a rape and domestic violence shelter, reach out and see if that's a possibility, so that if you have a client or a patient that needs services, if they're too hesitant, which is understandable, to call on their own, see if they'll let you make that connection to get those services for them. Also, there is a nationwide project by the Battered Women's Justice Project, for the Safer Approach Assessment here in West Virginia. And actually, Montague County is the first one. We have a special pilot program going on to teach guardian ad litems, children's attorneys, to meet with parties and do a safer approach. Those are also available by domestic violence specialists throughout the state. It is a nationwide program that has basically an interview section of lots of different questions about domestic violence in the home. And all of those questions to all of those parties are brought together into one report and given to the court, so that the court has more information to make major decisions and kind of assess where we are. So if you've never learned about the safer approach, it is an amazing tool to help us in our child welfare cases. And I strongly encourage you to take a look at that. At least in my county, we're seeing a good rise of non-fatal strangulation in the county. If you are treating someone in any kind of space or working with someone in any kind of space, I think it's helpful to kind of know what the physical symptoms of strangulation is, just because we're seeing such a rise in this. On the screen is a couple of handouts from the Training Institute of Strangulation Prevention. If you've never taken a look at their website, it's fantastic. And I strongly recommend that you take a look at it, just so you kind of have some basic understanding that, it's not just that a strangulation victim might have, um, red marks on their neck, but there's so many other physical symptoms that they may have. And even if they didn't go to the emergency room right away, even if several days have passed or several weeks have passed, they should still seek medical care, as you all know, and we want to encourage people to do that. So I strongly recommend to take a little bit of time to learn about this. We had Meredith Pheasant, St. Nurse at WVU last week, come to the courthouse, and we had a packed house for her presentation on strangulation. And I just learned so much, and I hope that you all are able to access that information, because I think it can really be kind of life changing in our cases. And finally, I just kind of wanted to highlight one more resource. Um, Family Finder by Aetna. At least here in West Virginia, our children who are in foster care are covered by Aetna Better Health. And Aetna has unrolled a program. And these resources can be found nationwide in different places, but it essentially allows a family finder. And if you have a child who, especially think of our children who maybe are older, 14, 15, 16, and they don't have parents, they don't have family. Well, who are those folks out there that are part of their family tree and who may be interested in connecting with them, whether it's for placement or just to get to know them and for some support? So this is a new program that we have access to. Any child who has Aetna Better Health in West Virginia can access this. And I strongly encourage you to take a look at this and see if you have any kids you're working with that this might be helpful. The contact for that is at the bottom of the screen, and if they're covered by Aetna in West Virginia, this program is offered to them. You get back a whole list of everyone that the child is related to, contact information as far as like what they can find, and then family diagrams about who is related to who and where these folks might be. So for our children in child welfare, that's just so invaluable, because we know from the research, as you all know, that keeping children within their communities, keeping children within their families is so important for their long term mental and physical and emotional health, as they become adults. So, this is a great new tool that's available to all of us. I really appreciate the time that I had with you all today. I could talk about child welfare all day, but I was told that I had 30 minutes, and this is my favorite topic. So I just tried to pack in as much as I can. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them. My email and my cell phone number is also on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you so much to Echo for having me back. I love being here with you all, and thank you for all that you do to support our children and families.